Okay, before we get started on the video, I wanted to show you how I designed this in PowerPoint because I'm not familiar with SketchUp yet, still learning it, but you can use PowerPoint. So let me go ahead and show you how I did. So the first thing I do is I just create individual shapes. You can see each one of these are just shapes and just random colors to simulate walnut and oak. And when you create these shapes, you can't turn them all to be able to flip them around. So I use Snippet. You can see if you try and turn them all, it's not going to work. So I use a tool called Snippet or any picture taking tool, and it's not showing here, but it's basically just took a picture, and then you can resize the picture however you want. So basically I take multiple pictures, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. You get the point. And then from there, once you have that, you can go ahead and flip around the individual pictures, and here's where you can see this pattern starting to come together. And if you want to adjust the pattern left or right, just go back in and adjust them and take another picture and start over. And for the maple strips, same thing. Just colored them, simulated maple and put them in there. Because once I finished building it, I just took a picture of it, turned it horizontal, and got to see what it looks like. And then for the measurements, I created this little chart where I basically just put lines and numbers to simulate inches and a half inch. So I could put some corresponding lines on the bottom, aligning with the inches or the half inch of where I would need to make my cuts to make my sizes. And that's it. That's how I designed it. So now let's get into the build. So here I'm just cutting down all my red oak to about 19 inches, a little bit wider, a little bit longer than what the board is going to be to give me some wiggle room. Same thing for the walnut, cut it down to the same size, and then I'll take each one of these over to my jointer, create a clean edge, and then bring them over to my table saw and start cutting to the measurements of my PowerPoint design. And if you want a good laugh, pay attention to the amount of times I say all right. Go ahead and count them up. Leave me a note in the comments. I know how many I did, but apparently I say that a lot when I make these videos. And now for the first glue up for my pattern. And I also use some braces to keep it pretty flat when I glue it up. And then once this is done, knock all this off. And I have some 50 grit on my belt sander to take off the glue and the little pieces of wood that's stuck to it. And then I run over it with a 60 and 100 on my regular sander. And it gets it pretty flat. I can't run this through my planer because it was a little too wide. All right, so now that we've got the first glue up done, getting ready for the cross cut. And again, why I ended up doing so much sanding was this board is basically 12 inches and 7/8, and my planer is 12.5 inches. I could take off a little bit and go down to 12.5 inches, but for me, sanding it with the belt sander was just fine. It's nice and flat. And one of the things that I learned from the last board that I did is that I didn't do the measurements right. So whenever I cut each of these and I stood them up, I lost a lot of distance because I wasn't counting the number of pieces that I would have and then multiplying that times the thickness of the board. So this one, I'm not actually sure yet. I'm gonna cross cut it and then see if I wanna go to an end grain. The guy that I'm making this from, he kinda likes this look. So I'm gonna cross cut it all and then mess around with it, flip them and show him, and we'll FaceTime and figure out which one he likes. But I wanted to make sure I get the most out of this board. So what I did was I basically measured this a couple times until I got it perfect to where I measured exactly 1 3/4 inches, and then I counted for the width of the blade on 1/8 of an inch on each one. And the piece I wanted to show before I cut this up is what I was talking about with the measurements. Is the board is, you can see it's 1 3/4 inches. So if I am going to end up making an end grain, you count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 times 1 3/4 inches comes out to 17 inches and a little bit of some change. I'm using my phone to shoot this, so I can't do the quick calculator. And that would be wide enough for a board. So I have a lot of options with this. So let's go ahead and get it cross cut and start playing around with the patterns. All right, now while I was getting set up to cut the edge off and start making my cross cuts, I noticed that it's not perfectly square, and it could have been just clamping real tight. I don't know, either way, it doesn't matter. I have a joiner, so I'm gonna run it through the joiner, and you can see what I'm talking about. It's not perfectly, so I'll be able to take this little bow out. And if you don't have a joiner, you can also just make a pretty simple jointing jig, just like this. So if I wanted to use this, I would basically just put move this over here. I put a little piece of scrap wood to give me some additional height. Just kind of hold it down. But anyway, then you just take this and line it up perfect with your edge on the front and on the back. And that little bow would have been right here, but I jointed it and I took that bow out. And then you just run it right along. And the way I made this jig, I'm not gonna make a full video on it. I mean, it's super, super simple. The board was a little wider than this. And then when I got my track basically fitting perfect in there, I put the track on there, started my blade, ran it all the way through, and that blade runs exactly perfect along the side of this. So again, if you don't have a joiner, no problem. You can use a simple little sled like this to joint your wood. And now for the cross cut. So I just raise my blade, get it right. Basically just creating a really straight edge. And I'm not gonna hit those pencil marks perfect. That's not the point. The point was just to use as much of the board as possible. So now that I've got it set up, this is when I actually create my first very accurate cut, the exact right size that I want. And you can see the original taking off the line was not right on the pencil mark, which is okay, because from this point on with this very straight edge, all the other cuts are going to be perfect. All right, so now that we have everything cross-cut, I was talking to the guy who's gonna have this board, and he was undecided between face grain and edge grain. I personally like the edge grain, so last night I went ahead and finished a little piece for him with some of the mineral oil and the board wax, just so he could see the difference between the finished face and the finished end grain. He ultimately went with the end grain, which is what I really like. Him and I had always talked about putting some strips in between here, so I wanted to give him an example. So we are going to cut these in a little bit, but I wanted to show you a mistake I made. So when I originally built this, I wanted these all to line up, basically about like this, or even like this, you know, just a better pattern to where they connected. Certainly not like that if I put them all together and I flatten this out. So I don't think that looks very good. The mistake I made was, and I even planned for, one more of these strips had to go on the outside, and that would put this in a little bit further. So a little bit of a mess up, but it's okay, because what I'm gonna do, and I talked to him about this and he likes it as well. Turns out we didn't even really like the strip, and let me show you why. We like just the edge. And you know, if we close this up right here, and that was kind of the design in the beginning, which you saw earlier in the PowerPoint, but we're just not a big fan of that. So it's gonna actually be nicer when we do what I'm gonna do. So what I'm gonna end up doing to fix this is I'm gonna line all these up and I'm gonna glue it like that. So it'll be a nice little pattern, look about like that. And then I'm just gonna trim this off to perfect edges. So yeah, I think it'll look good. So now we're gonna get these maple strips cut down and get this last glue up put together and finish it off tomorrow, hopefully. A really easy way to get the exact same strips as you had before instead of measuring it, just put that in there, put the strip in there and get it very, very close to the blade, lock it down, see it slid over a little bit, probably a little bit bigger than I want. That's perfect. Get it locked down. I adjusted the blade to where it's right above it because I'm gonna use my push stick, which is basically my sacrificial stick. You can see a lot of cuts through here, and I can just unscrew those screws and change this piece. That might be what I do for this piece. So that way I can run it all the way through and not worry about any safety issues, and be able to keep that tied up against the fence. And so let's go ahead and get it started. And if you're interested in how I built this push stick, there's the video. There'll be a link in the top right. Now that we have all the pieces cut, I am going to just trim these real quick on the crosscut sled and get ready for a glue up. All right, so now that I've made my little mark, I'm gonna go ahead and set a stop block. This one actually goes right above it, so whenever I built this thing, I didn't take that into account. I can't go down one more, it's not enough. So Anyway, I had plans to rebuild this one, make it a little bit bigger anyway. So we'll go back to our old trusty stop block. And once I get them all cut, then it's just on to the next glue up. So get everything situated how you want to do it. Get just clamp set up and glue a lot. All right, it's been 24 hours. Let's go ahead and get this out of here. All right, so that's what the bottom looks like. A lot of glue. Could have turned it over and scraped it. 30, 40 minutes in, but that's all right. I don't mind belt sanding. I got some 50 grit on there, and it knocks all this right down, and then we just keep going up in grit from there, and it cleans up all the belt sand marks. Works just fine for me. Let's get it. And that jointing jig I was talking about earlier has a lot of different uses. I use it all the time just to clean up edges. And you can see right here, perfect example. I wanted to cut these little pieces off, so I just lined it up perfect and just cut those right off and didn't take off any of the board at all. Perfect. See? Perfect little jointing jig. Even when you don't need to joint things, super simple sled. Little piece on the bottom, good to go. And then you can flip it around, run it along your fence, and it'll be perfectly square. Perfectly flat. Perfectly flat. And then I'm just going to put a little small roundover on these edges, soften them up a little bit. All right, now that we've got it sanded up to 150 on both sides and on the edges, I'm going to go ahead and put the finger grooves on the side. So I made a little jig so I can basically clamp it down to the edges, and then I'll be able to run my router inside of this, and it'll make a good cut. So I'm a little dusty because I was trying it out earlier. So yeah, it works pretty good. You can see it basically makes a cut, and then I'll just keep going down and down. Then I'll sand that, put a little round over on these edges, and we'll have a nice little finger groove. But I'll give you a close-up of the routing, so let's go ahead and get it started. And I'm just finding the middle right here, but since I've made this video, I chose the easy button and just bought one of those center finding rulers. Makes life a lot easier. And then just keep taking a little bit out at a time until you get to the depth that you want. All right, now that we've got these notched out, I'm just sanding it. I have this little Mighty Mouse sander. Works really good for these edges. I can get right in the corners, and I got a 120 on here, and I got a 120 right here, and I'm just gonna basically just pass it on these edges and take off the sharp marks. That's about it. All right, so tonight we're gonna put the juice groove in with all this junk. Yeah, it's a lot of parts. I know I'm gonna eventually build me a jig, but for now I'll throw this together and show you how it helps me get the juice groove perfect. So let's do it. And while I'm getting this put together, if you're enjoying what you're watching, hit that like and subscribe. It definitely keeps me motivated to keep making videos. All right, now that I got it together, I'll walk you through it real quick. So these pieces obviously have to be lower than the board, so the bottom of the router can clear those, but you want the router to be able to hit these edges, so it's gonna make a perfect pass around. The reason I put these pieces on is because before this would move a little bit, and we don't want that. So you can see it's a little bit tighter now. And again, I said earlier I'm gonna build a jig that's, adjustable and all that, but for now, this works. And I just keep making shallow passes until I get to the depth that I want. Okay, you can see that turned out pretty good. Got one little burn spot right here because I went in a little too slow. But you saw the trick that at least has worked for me. The last couple times I did some burning in the corners. Take a little bit off at a time. I slowed my router down to 3. If you have a variable speed router, you slow it down to 3. Make sure you have a short bit. That's a brand new bit, so I don't know how many times it'll last, but it worked perfect on the first time. And very shallow passes, and it came out just fine. I had to clear out the dust a lot. It makes a lot of dust because the dust was starting to interfere with my pass, but other than that, it came out pretty good. So we'll dismantle this and finish sanding and get it oiled up. We're almost done with this board. Time to sand and wrap this thing up. I use this little dowel piece and wrap some sandpaper, and it fits perfectly in this juice groove. And then just work my way up the grits all the way up to 220 before I go ahead and pop the grain and then start again at 180 after the grain is popped and then dried. All right, now that we sprayed the board down so the grain will raise a little bit, I'm gonna go back over it with a 220. I got my little mighty metal sander, so I'll hit this with some 220, hit both sides, and it'll be just about ready to oil. Let's go ahead and make this last quick sand. So I did decide I'm gonna go all the way up to 320. So I just want to smooth out these edges a little bit. Plus it's oak end grain, and that's not usually a very smooth wood. So I want to get it as smooth as possible before I put that oil on. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that sanded down. I'm not gonna bore you guys with this part. I'll see you in the oiling process. And now for everybody's favorite part. This is just straight mineral oil. So I'll put this on pretty liberally and then I'll let it sit for about 20 minutes. Actually, just continue to rub it around in the board on both sides for around 20 minutes and then wipe it off pretty good. Move on to the next step. Now that I have it wiped down with just some mineral oil, it's soaking in pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and put some of this board finish in here on there, which is basically just mineral oil and beeswax. So this will put a waxy seal on it, and then I'm gonna let that sit overnight. So. Now that we've let it sit overnight, it's sitting in really good shape. So we're gonna go ahead and wipe it down real good, get this wax, the film off. And then we're gonna go ahead and put these on. So I'll just wipe this down real quick and then I'll be right back. Now for the corners, I did make a little jig. It's basically just a couple pieces, perfect 90. And then I just put a little piece of scrap, you know, 1/4 inch plywood that I had there. And it goes perfect in the corner, and I already drilled a little hole right there, as you can see. That's my perfect mark, and it basically is 1 inch from both sides. So we'll go ahead and get these holes pre-drilled and screw these in and be done with this board. All right, that's it. Board's finished. Came out good. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. And if you stuck around this whole time, again, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Go ahead and leave me a note. I know there's a lot of things I could do better. Love your feedback, and let me know what you think.